Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about government policy and human rights. Welcome back to Policy and Rights here in Depictions Media Radio. I'm your host, Michael Clogs. We're going to hear from President Biden as this is the day that we remember the Holocaust and how the Third Reich, Nazi Germany, killed millions of European Jews, and the atrocities that were committed during World War II by Adolf Hitler and the Nazis, and how we should, whenever there is an act like genocide, we should remember it. We should remember it so that we know not to do it again, so that we know to avoid those pitfalls that causes hatred to turn human brother on human brother, that causes wars and widespread war to happen. So, why don't we look a little bit at what is going on in the world today, and we're going to look at the Canadian Foreign Minister as what she has to say about the Israeli operations in Rafah, and how that is continuing forward. I did receive some reports that, of course, the border crossing for humanitarian efforts into the city of Rafah has been cut off. This woman was a midwife, and she's calling from a maternity hospital, and it's the last maternity hospital in Gaza, and it was only meant to serve at best 100 or so people, women and giving birth, mothers and their babies, and now it is serving thousands of mothers and babies, and some of them, she said, that the women were too small to be able to give birth. Some of the babies were too small to be born, even though they were actually full term. And some of the things that she described just aren't right and could possibly be described as horrific. So, on to the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Canada, as the Liberal minister expressed disappointment and dismay Tuesday in response to Israel's invasion of the city of Rafah in the Gaza Strip. The last refuge for displaced Palestinians in the territory. Canada's foreign minister rebuked Israel for its military operation in Rafah, but said she's holding out hope that the ceasefire talks will prevail. An invasion of Rafah, which would endanger the lives of women and children, innocent civilians, is completely unacceptable. Melanie Joly told reporters on Parliament Hill in Ottawa. Israeli officials announced Monday that the country approved a military operation into the border city and began striking targets in the area. The move came just hours after Hamas announced that it had accepted an Egyptian-Qatar ceasefire proposal, which Israel says does not meet essential demands. The situation in Palestine territory is already catastrophic, and a vast majority of the people in the city have already been displaced and have nowhere to go. She also said Canada is putting pressure on Israeli officials to stop the military actions. So a lot of that is true. The Israeli government told those civilians to evacuate into other areas of Gaza, which have already been pretty much so destroyed. And the flip side to this is, of course, that the border crossing that where the humanitarian aid was coming across, which is now under control, of course, of Israel, was hit by Hamas rocket fire, killing 3 or 4 Israeli soldiers, and there has been some retaliation from the Hamas. And someone asked me the question, is it proportional into what Israel has done and what Israel can do? And that is a interesting question. And the better question is, if the Hamas was to just simply lay down arms, would Israel continue their destruction, or would they stop and accept it as terms of a ceasefire? So, other updates. Well, Stormy Daniels took the stand in New York, and Mr. Trump didn't seem to be too happy about it. Stormy Daniels, the adult film actress in the center of the criminal hush money trial, described meeting Mr. Trump in 2006 in a golf tournament in Lake Tahoe. He was obviously a golfer, she said, and he was probably as old or older than my father. And the prosecutor did ask Ms. Daniels if she saw Mr. Trump in the room, and she responded with yes. And she could actually point him out as he was sitting, of course, in the defendant's seat. Ms. Daniels raised her eyes and looked, and she says she was paid $130,000 to stay silent about the 2006 extramarital tryst in Lake Tahoe, and whom the prosecutors said falsified business records to cover up the payment, and as he ran for president. The courtroom confrontation Tuesday was Daniels and Trump's face-to-face meeting in years. It was a remarkable moment in U.S. history as the former and potential future president, in the midst of a campaign for the White House, was forced to listen to a woman who claims he had sex with her, detailed the most intimate details of the alleged affair, and suggested that the sex was unwanted. For the moment, at the moment, the entire courtroom, after the prosecutor announced the people called Stormy Daniels, Daniels offered a vivid account of her relationship with Mr. Trump, describing a difficult power dynamic with a then television star, left feeling ashamed. The former president, on trial for multiple felonies, sat quietly as Daniels recalled the graphic details of what she characterized as an unwanted sexual encounter. At the time, she seemed to suggest the sex was non-consensual. Trump was bigger and blocking the way, she said, before adding she was not a threat. Daniels told the court that she found herself staring at the ceiling and didn't know how she got there. She said, but added she was neither drunk nor under the influence of drugs. So, interesting testimony from Stormy Daniels in the Trump hush money trial. So why don't we move forward, and we're going to listen to the Holocaust ceremony in the United States as Mr. Biden speaks to people about anti-Semitism and how the United States will do everything to protect the Jewish people and Israel.
Stuart Eisenstadt, Chairman of the United States Holocaust Memorial Council.
For the Jewish community in our country and around the world, these solemn days of remembrance come at a particularly fraught time. The unimaginable has become a reality before our eyes. What would the 6 million victims of the Holocaust, murdered because of a Nazi racial ideology rooted in historical anti-Semitism, think about its revival in the United States in the 21st century? In the United States, whose brave soldiers defeated Hitler's Nazi regime and, along with their allies, liberated the concentration camps. What do the aging eyewitnesses, the 245,000 Holocaust survivors around the world, almost 40,000 in our own country, think when they witness a rise of anti-Semitic outbursts, harassment, threats, and violence on our campuses, in the land of the free and the home of the brave, evoking what they witnessed as young girls and boys in Nazi-occupied Europe? What do they make of the fact that for the last several years before October 7th, police guards were necessary at synagogues and Jewish day schools and community centers? How do they come to terms with seeing so many young people justify Hamas's brutality, which carried out the greatest single-day loss of Jewish lives in Israel since the Holocaust? How do we best honor the memory of those who died at the hands of the Nazis, 6 million men, women, and children? At the outbreak of World War II, September 1st, 1939, there were 17 million Jews in a world of 1 billion. Now, there are only 15.7 million in a world of 8 billion. But sheer numbers mask the loss and the Holocaust of the flower of Jewish religion, culture, the arts, science, and yes, those eking out a living in small shtetls but preserving their Jewish heritage. We should honor them in the following ways. First, we owe it to the 250,000 Holocaust survivors to do all we can to assure that in their remaining years they live in a dignity denied them in their youth. And yet, despite generous reparations payments by post-war Germany, which I've helped negotiate, those going back to 1952, today 90% of survivors live in or near poverty in the former Soviet Union and Central and Eastern Europe, 35% in the State of Israel, and 30% in our own country, the richest in the history of the world. Joe Biden, when he was vice president, championed a U.S. government program to help survivors. But we all owe it to aging survivors to do more to assure that they are well taken care of. Second, we must absorb the lessons of the Holocaust, which began by recognizing that the Holocaust was not inevitable. It was not inevitable. Early action against discrimination and intimidation and aggression is essential, whether abroad or on our college campuses. Hitler's original goal was not the final solution, to kill all European Jews. Rather, it was to make Germany Judenrein, free of Jews. He methodically proceeded step by step to gauge German and world opinion to the gradual disenfranchisement of German Jews. And here's what he saw: no boycott of the Berlin Olympics, no economic sanctions or other action after the Anschluss with Austria, no action with the takeover of the Czech Sudetenland and the Munich Pact, no action after the fierce pogrom of Kristallnacht, with thousands of synagogues and Jewish businesses torched and mass Jewish arrests. Hitler specifically commented on the failure of the 1938 Avian Conference, called by President Roosevelt to deal with German Jewish refugees seeking to escape the Nazis' grasp, but failing to lift immigration quotas, and the barring in 1939 of the SS St. Louis with over 900 Jewish refugees waiting for 3 days to land in Miami Harbor and being turned back. Hitler concluded that the world believed that Jews were dispensable. Once World War II began, the Roosevelt administration knew from multiple sources, documented by our Holocaust Museum and other scholars, of the mass murder of the Jews, but failed to take special action to save Jews and other minorities. Our museum's special exhibit, Americans in the Holocaust, revealed that the State Department kept as many Jewish refugees out of America as possible, and frankly, this reflected the views of a majority of the American public, despite their knowing of and opposing the Nazi terror against the Jews. In 1944, in the U.S. Treasury Department, in which I had an office, the staff of the Treasury Department presented to Treasury Secretary Morgenthau a remarkable report, unlike that I think any agency has ever presented to the head of a major department. It was entitled, "The Acquiescence of This Administration in the Murder of the Jews." The staff of the Treasury Department presented that to the Secretary. And this finally led President Roosevelt to create the War Refugee Board that saved tens of thousands of Jews, but not soon enough to save the last large Jewish community. In less than 2 months, more than 430,000 Hungarian Jews were deported to Auschwitz. By the time our brave soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy on D-Day, June 6, 1944, of the 6 million European Jews who would be killed, 5 million had already been murdered. President Biden and the bipartisan leadership of the Congress, with the leadership of the Speaker of the House, Speaker Johnson, Minority Leader Jeffries, and the Senate, are to be congratulated for taking the lessons to heart of World War II and the Holocaust about the threat of unchecked aggression by continuing aid to Ukraine's defense of democracy against Vladimir Putin, who has repeatedly publicly distorted and exploited the Holocaust, and at the same time passing aid to Israel at its moment of greatest threat, a threat from Hamas and other terrorist organizations who do not seek a peaceful solution to the Palestinian-Israeli dispute, but rather to eliminate Israel root and branch as a Jewish state. At home, the Biden administration launched last year, well before October 7th, the nation's first national strategy to counter anti-Semitism, involving all federal departments and agencies. And just a few days ago, again with the leadership, bipartisan, of the Speaker and the leader, the House of Representatives passed the Bipartisan Anti-Semitism Awareness Act to clarify the definition of anti-Semitism. We thank you. And last, the most lasting way to honor the victims of the Holocaust and today's survivors as eyewitnesses leave us is Holocaust education. To combat those who deny, denigrate, or distort the Holocaust, and to make clear to future generations what can happen when anti-Semitism goes unchecked, which threatens us today. To remember the power of propaganda, first used on a mass basis on radio by the Nazis, but now virulent on our own social media. To learn the need to protect democracy and the rule of law from assault, and the possibilities for each of us, and particularly our young people, as they start their life, to make the right choice, to take the path that rescuers took during the Holocaust, and our museum recognizes them, but not to be indifferent or to choose to follow Hitler down the abyss. But on these days of remembrance, Holocaust survivors are telling us an inspirational story. It's a story of resilience. It's a story of fierce resolve to never give up and never give in. It's a story of rebuilding. It's a story of not allowing the trauma of losing their families and their communities and their abandonment by the world to deter them from creating a new life with new families and a renewed determination to follow the Jewish admonition of Tikkun Olam, repairing the holes in the fabric of the world. You truly are our inspiration as we confront unprecedented anti-Semitism in our own time, in our own country, to rededicate ourselves to fulfilling Elie Wiesel's vision that no one's future should be like their past. It's my distinct pleasure and privilege to introduce a friend of almost 50 years who is a great supporter of Holocaust survivors, who entrusted me with the chairmanship of our great Holocaust Museum because he knew that Holocaust justice for survivors, memory for victims, and lessons for future generations has been an animating feature of my life. To me, he is not only President of the United States, he's a mensch, who as Vice President came unannounced to my late wife's shiva in 2013 and spoke spontaneously and movingly about the meaning of her life. It's a gesture my family and I shall never forget. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Speaker, Leader Jeffries, members of Congress, dignitaries, and most especially Holocaust survivors, the President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Thank you. Thank you, and please. Thank you, Stu Eisenstadt, for that introduction, for your leadership in the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. You're a true scholar and statesman and a dear friend. Speaker Johnson, Leader Jeffries, members of Congress, and especially the survivors of the Holocaust. My mother were here, she'd look at you and say, God love you all. God love you all. Abe Foxman and all other survivors who embody absolute courage and dignity and grace are here as well. During these sacred days of remembrance, we grieve, we give voice to the 6 million Jews who were systematically targeted and murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators during World War II. We honor the memory of victims, the pain of survivors, the bravery of heroes who stood up to Hitler's unspeakable evil, and we recommit to heading and heeding the lessons that one of the darkest chapters in human history, to revitalize and realize the responsibility of never again. Never again, simply translated for me, means never forget. Never forget. Never forgetting means we must keep telling the story. We must keep teaching the truth. We must keep teaching our children and our grandchildren. And the truth is, we're at risk of people not knowing the truth. That's why growing up, my dad taught me and my siblings about the horrors of the Shoah at our family dinner table. That's why I visited Yad Vashem with my family as a senator, as vice president, and as president. And that's why I took my grandchildren to Dachau so they could see and bear witness to the perils of indifference, the complicity of silence in the face of evil that they knew was happening. Germany, 1933. Hitler and his Nazi party rise to power by rekindling one of the world's oldest forms of prejudice and hate, anti-Semitism. His rule didn't begin with mass murder. It started slowly across economic, political, social, and cultural life. Propaganda demonizing Jews, boycotts of Jewish businesses, synagogues defaced with swastikas, harassment of Jews in the street and in the schools, anti-Semitic demonstrations, pogroms, organized riots. With the indifference of the world, Hitler knew he could expand his reign of terror by eliminating Jews from Germany, to annihilate Jews across Europe through genocide the Nazis called the final solution. Concentration camps, gas chambers, mass shootings. By the time the war ended, 6 million Jews, 1 out of every 3 Jews in the entire world, were murdered. This ancient hatred of Jews didn't begin with the Holocaust. It didn't end with the Holocaust either, or even after our victory in World War II. This hatred continues to lie deep in the hearts of too many people in the world, and requires our continued vigilance and outspokenness. That hatred was brought to life on October 7th in 2023. On the sacred Jewish holiday, the terrorist group Hamas unleashed the deadliest day of the Jewish people since the Holocaust. Driven by ancient desire to wipe out the Jewish people off the face of the earth, over 1,200 innocent people, babies, parents, grandparents, slaughtered in their kibbutz, massacred at a music festival, brutally raped, mutilated, and sexually assaulted. Thousands more carrying wounds, bullets and shrapnel from the memory of that terrible day they endured. Hundreds taken hostage, including survivors of the Shoah. Now, here we are, not 75 years later, but just 7.5 months later, and people are already forgetting. We're already forgetting that Hamas unleashed this terror. It was Hamas that brutalized Israelis. It was Hamas who took and continues to hold hostages. I have not forgotten, nor have you, and we will not forget. And as Jews around the world still cope with the atrocities and trauma of that day and its aftermath, we've seen a ferocious surge of anti-Semitism in America and around the world. Vicious propaganda on social media. Jews forced to keep their hide, their keepers under baseball hats, tuck their Jewish stars into their shirts. On college campuses, Jewish students blocked, harassed, attacked while walking to class. Anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic posters, slogans calling for the annihilation of Israel, the world's only Jewish state. Too many people denying, downplaying, rationalizing, ignoring the horrors of the Holocaust. And October 7th, including Hamas's appalling use of sexual violence to torture and terrorize Jews. It's absolutely despicable, and it must stop. Silence. Silence and denial can hide much, but it can erase nothing. Some injustices are so heinous, so horrific, so grievous, they cannot be buried, no matter how hard people try. In my view, a major lesson of the Holocaust is, as mentioned earlier, was not inevitable. We know hate never goes away, it only hides. And given a little oxygen, it comes out from under the rocks. We also know what stops hate. One thing, all of us. The late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs described anti-Semitism as a virus that has survived and mutated over time. Together, we cannot continue to let that happen. We have to remember our basic principles as a nation. We have an obligation. We have an obligation to learn the lessons of history so we don't surrender our future to the horrors of the past. We must give hate no safe harbor against anyone. Anyone. From the very founding, our very founding, Jewish Americans, who represent only about 2% of the U.S. population, have helped lead the cause of freedom for everyone in our nation. From that experience, we know scapegoating and demonizing any minority is a threat to every minority and the very foundation of our democracy. So in moments like this, we have to put these principles that we're talking about into action. I understand people have strong beliefs and deep convictions about the world. In America, we respect and protect the fundamental right to free speech, to debate and disagree, to protest peacefully and make our voices heard, I understand that's America, but there is no place on any campus in America, any place in America, for anti-Semitism or hate speech or threats of violence of any kind. Whether against Jews or anyone else. Violent attacks, destroying property, is not peaceful protest. It's against the law. And we are not a lawless country. We're a civil society. We uphold the rule of law. And no one should have to hide or be brave just to be themselves. To the Jewish community, I want you to know, I see your fear, your hurt, and your pain. Let me reassure you, as your president, you're not alone. You belong. You always have and you always will. And my commitment to the safety of the Jewish people, the security of Israel, and its right to exist as an independent Jewish state is ironclad, even when we disagree. My administration is working around the clock to free remaining hostages, just as we have freed hostages already, and will not rest until we bring them all home. My administration, with our second gentleman's leadership, has launched our nation's first national strategy to counter anti-Semitism. That's mobilizing the full force of the federal government to protect Jewish communities. But we know this is not the work of government alone or Jews alone. That's why I'm calling on all Americans to stand united against anti-Semitism and hate in all its forms. My dear friend, and he became a friend, the late Elie Wiesel said, quote, "One person of integrity can make a difference." We have to remember that. Now more than ever. Here in Emancipation Hall, the U.S. Capitol, among the towering statues of history, is a bronze bust of Raoul Wallenberg. Born in Sweden as a Lutheran, he was a businessman and a diplomat. While stationed in Hungary during World War II, he used diplomatic cover to hide and rescue about 100,000 Jews over a 6-month period. Among them was a 16-year-old Jewish boy who escaped a Nazi labor camp. After the war ended, that boy received a scholarship from the Hillel Foundation to study in America. He came to New York City penniless, but determined to turn his pain into purpose, along with his wife, also a Holocaust survivor. He became a renowned economist and foreign policy thinker, eventually making his way to this very Capitol on the staff of a first-term senator. That Jewish refugee was Tom Lantos, and that senator was me. Tom and his wife Annette and their family became dear friends to me and my family. Tom would go on to become the only Holocaust survivor ever elected to Congress, where he became a leading voice on civil rights and human rights around the world. Tom never met Raoul, who was taken prisoner by the Soviets, never to be heard from again. But through Tom's efforts, Raoul's bust is here in the Capitol. He was also given honorary U.S. citizenship, only the second person ever after Winston Churchill. The Holocaust Museum here in Washington is located on a road in Raoul's name. The story of the power of a single person to put aside our differences, to see our common humanity, to stand up to hate, and its ancient story of resilience from immense pain, persecution, to find hope, purpose, and meaning in life, we try to live and share with one another. That story endures. Let me close with this. I know these days of remembrance fall on difficult times. We all do well to remember These days also fall during the month we celebrate Jewish American heritage, a heritage that stretches from our earliest days to enrich every single part of American life today. Great Jewish American, named Tom Lantos, used the phrase, "The veneer of civilization is paper thin." We are its guardians, and we can never rest. My fellow Americans, we must be those guardians. We must never rest. We must rise against hate, meet across the divide, see our common humanity, and God bless the victims and survivors of Shoah. May the resilient hearts, the courageous spirit, and the eternal flame of faith of the Jewish people forever shine their light on America and around the world. Pray God. Thank you all.
After we're done, you're done with me, we're going to have a guest, which is Andrea Domenico, the head of OCHA's office in the occupied Palestinian territory. After we're done, you're done with me, we're going to have a guest, will be joining us from Jerusalem, which is Andrea Domenico, the head of OCHA's office in the occupied Palestinian territory. As you heard the Secretary General this morning, he said that he is disturbed and distressed by the renewed military activity in Rafah by the Israeli Defense Forces. He said that the closure of both the Rafah and Karim Shalom crossings is especially damaging to an already dire humanitarian situation. They must be reopened immediately, he said. The Secretary General urged the government of Israel to stop any further escalation. He reiterated his appeal for both parties to show political courage and spare no effort to secure an agreement now. The Secretary General added that international humanitarian law is unequivocal. Civilians must be protected whether they leave Rafah, whether they stay. He warned that an assault on Rafah would be a strategic mistake, a political calamity, and a humanitarian nightmare. Just a few more details on Rafah. According to our OCHA colleagues, they say that yesterday's evacuation orders from the military Israeli have already resulted in forced displacement of tens of thousands of people. Many of them have been uprooted multiple times over the past 7 months. Civilians in Gaza must be protected and have their basic needs met, whether they move or they stay. Those who leave must have enough time to do so, as well as safe routes and safe places to go. As you're aware, both crossings, as we said, are closed. This means that we cannot bring in humanitarian assistance, cannot access the nutrition supplies we need to treat more than 3,000 children with acute malnutrition, and we cannot access the fuel needed to power our response efforts. Also just want to flag that UN Women in a new report says that Rafah now hosts more than 700,000 women and girls who have nowhere else to go. It says that 93% of women respondents express feeling unsafe within their own homes or in displaced locations. Over 80% of women report feeling of depression, 66% are not able to sleep, and over 70% have heightened anxiety or nightmares. And that's according to polling they have done. Also, as you know, the President of Italy addressed the General Assembly this morning. The Secretary General spoke at that meeting, and he affirmed that Italy has consistently demonstrated its leadership at the United Nations in defending peace, human rights, and sustainable development, hosting many UN bodies, and deploying its forces in peacekeeping missions. Today, the Secretary General added these shared values are under threat. The Secretary General said that as discussions ahead of the Summit of the Future enter a key phase, Italy's voice is more necessary than ever to bridge divides, to build trust, and to find solutions. He said that Italy's priorities as G7 president, defense of the rules-based international system, dialogue with the Global South, and human-centered artificial intelligence governance echo this vision. Those remarks have been shared with you, and also we put out last night the remarks that the Secretary General made before his meeting with President Mattarella in his office and before he hosted a dinner for him, in which the Secretary General said that Italy is always present in the UN's activities and present in climate action, human rights, the rule of law, peacekeeping, and sustainable development. Those remarks were also shared with you. This morning in the Security Council, Jean-Pierre Lacroix, the head of our peace operations, spoke to council members on the operations of the UN interim force in Abyei, known as UNISFA. He said that the political progress towards the determination of the final status of Abyei remains stalled. Nonetheless, he underscored that the UN stands ready to support the parties in close coordination with the African Union once the parties in position return to the political process. For her part, the Special Envoy of the Secretary General for the Horn of Africa, Hannah Tete, updated council members regarding the political situation in Sudan and South Sudan and other regional issues. Staying on peacekeeping and moving to the Congo, our colleagues at the UN peacekeeping mission in that country have closed their permanent operating base in Baraka in South Kivu yesterday. This was done in accordance with the mission's disengagement plan. During the ceremony, the mission leadership expressed gratitude to the government, civil society, and local residents for their 17 years of cooperation in the town of Baraka. Some peacekeeping assets were donated to the provincial authorities there. But as we mentioned last week, in accordance with Security Council Resolution 2717, the mission's mandate, including the responsibility to protect civilians, has ended in South Kivu as of May 1. And turning to Haiti, our humanitarian colleagues there are telling us that heavy rainfall is affecting the northwest of the country since May 3rd, has triggered landslides and floods and damaged buildings and homes in the region. According to local authorities, 13 people were killed in a landslide in Cape Haitien. More rainfall and additional floods are expected in the coming days, including in the capital, Port-au-Prince, where sites hosting people that are displaced by the ongoing violence are already facing a sanitation challenge prior to the heavy rains. And in a statement related to the violence in the capital, the humanitarian coordinator at Interim in Haiti, Bruno Mais, strongly condemned the profound humanitarian impact of the repeated attacks in the Solino neighborhood and the surrounding areas in Port-au-Prince. Thousands of people have been forced to flee their homes. Those who remain trapped find themselves without access to water, to food, or to fuel. Mr. Mais urged all armed actors to allow humanitarian organizations to assist those affected in line with basic humanitarian standards. He also called on them to stop the violence. And another flooding situation in a different part of the world, this time in northwest Syria, where we and our humanitarian partners are continuing to respond to last week's windstorm and flash flooding that impacted more than 12,000 people, mostly in the area of Idlib. I can tell you that yesterday an OCHA team completed cross-border mission to Idlib to assess the impact of the floods. They met the managers of 2 displacement camps as well as families living there. We've been told that in one of those sites, the home of 115 households were damaged. As of yesterday, we and our humanitarian partners have provided support to 20 different displacement sites impacted by the floods, as well as emergency food assistance for 7,500 people, as well as tents and other core relief items for more than 5,300 men, women, and children. Mobile health teams are providing outpatient consultations in Idlib, Harim, and Ephraim as surveillance teams step up efforts to monitor waterborne diseases in high-risk areas. And just to note that since last year's devastating earthquake in February, we've completed more than 450 cross-border missions to northwest Syria, including 140 this year alone. However, funding shortfalls are challenging efforts to provide humanitarian assistance. Overall, 6% of the more than $4 billion needed for this year's response in Syria has been received. This includes just 8% of the $1.4 billion for the cross-border humanitarian response in the Northwest. And today, the World Health Organization announced that Belize, Jamaica, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines have eliminated mother-to-child transmission of HIV and syphilis. The achievement represents significant progress to strengthen maternal and child health programs to boost the region's advancement of the Sustainable Development Goals, including AIDS epidemic as a public threat, more online. And the International Organization for Migration today launched the World Migration Report. The report reveals that international migration continues to drive human development and economic growth. The report also sheds light on challenges. While the estimated number of international migrants worldwide is 281 million people, the number of displaced individuals due to the conflict, violence, disaster, and other reasons has surged to the highest level in modern records, reaching 117 million men, women, and children. And before I close and I take your questions, I just want to introduce you to a special guest, and that is Major Alem Douzi of Tunisia. She's a peacekeeper serving in our mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Please, right here, next to me. No, on the other side, so people can see you. Oh.
Yeah.
Par ici, merci. Et voilà. She is a peacekeeper serving in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and is the winner of this year's Trailblazer Award, which recognizes women, justice, and corrections officers' outstanding contribution to peace operations. She is the first military technician, armament, and ammunition expert with the prosecution support cell in the Democratic Republic of the Congo's UN's peacekeeping mission. She provides technical advice to investigators on specific methods and techniques used particularly for the collection, protection, preparation of evidence for trials. And she has conducted various technical missions with MONUSCO, including detailed analysis of the shooting down of a MONUSCO helicopter. And because of her expertise, she's called upon to assist the Congolese authorities to investigate mass crimes committed by firearms. She's going to say a few words, but then there's a ceremony at 1:15 in the Trusteeship Council in which you're all invited. So please.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I'm Alem Douzi. I'm from Tunisia. I'm engineer in technical weapons, and I'm major in the Tunisian army. I'm going to just say a few words because after that, I will go to the ceremony for receiving the prestigious award for women, a Trailblazer Award for women justice and correction officers. As a Tunisian woman, I'm deeply honored to receive this prestigious award for women justice and support for women justice and correction officer, and also I'm honored to receive this award, and it encourages me to continue what I have started and to present my country. And I stand here today not only as an award recipient, but also as an advocate for women peacekeeping serving, because I advocate them and I encourage them to embrace challenges, to strive to make meaningful contributions for sustainable peace. So every woman, I just encourage her to participate in all peacekeeping mission, to try to blaze her own trail and to not take the well-trodden path, and why not to be a role model. So from my place here, I just want to thank, and I take Madame Bintou Keita, the SRSG of MONUSCO, as a role model, and I hope that I meet her expectations. And thank you all. Thank you.
Congratulations, and if you're interested in interviewing the Major, please reach out to Lee Woodier and Mine Action, and he will facilitate everything. Speaking of facilitation, I'm here to facilitate your answers. Margaret Bashir.
It was a little disappointing the Secretary General didn't take questions this morning. I know he's busy, but 5 minutes, that's all we ask. And could you tell us, he was saying countries with influence should use it regarding Rafah. Has he used his influence? Who has he spoken to? Has he reached out to President Biden or Prime Minister Netanyahu or anybody else?
Our colleagues on the ground in Jerusalem and those not on ground, including Sigrid Kaag and Tor Venesland, have been in contact with Israeli authorities and others to pass on our messages. I have nothing to share with you publicly on the Secretary General's own phone calls. Kristen.
I noticed in your remarks that you said that evacuation orders in Rafah have already resulted in the forced displacement of tens of thousands of people. Is not forced displacement a war crime?
I think it is the way it is framed. They are being forced. They are feeling forced to move to seek safety. What needs to be established as a war crime, that will have to be investigated.
But
yes.
generally, that's the definition, no? I mean, forced, they were told to leave for their own safety.
And people will seek shelter. The problem right now in Gaza, and I think Andrea will speak to it as well, but I mean, I spoke to a colleague of ours in Gaza just a few minutes ago who was describing the situation as chaotic, as desperate. He said at some point yesterday people were celebrating thinking there would be a ceasefire, and obviously there has not been. And that's why the Secretary General was calling on parties to redouble their effort to reach that. Edie, and then we'll come back to Ismail.
Are there any serious negotiations going on with the Israelis about opening any crossing into Gaza? Because if this goes on significantly longer, there will be no water, food.
There are very serious discussions going on our end.
And a couple of other issues. First, on Haiti, is there any update on the deployment of the Kenyans now that a transitional government and prime minister have been chosen?
No, I don't have any more. I don't have an update on when we could see the first boots on the ground, so to speak.
And on cross-border in Syria, isn't the end of the mandate approaching soon?
Yes, it is, and those discussions are ongoing with the Syrian authorities. But as you know, sometimes they go down rather to the proverbial wire. Deji.
Yes, back to Gaza. The closing of the two border crossings, as well as the already started operation in East Rafah, not full scale, but started. Does that impact the operation and security of the UN staff there?
We will take whatever precautions we need to take for our staff. Obviously,
for example,
our staff continues to operate in a combat area.
But they haven't been evacuated yet.
No, we continue to stay and deliver. And reminder that the vast majority of the staff there are Palestinians.
Okay.
Sorry, Ismail, and then we'll go to Benny. Yeah, please. Sorry. I've just not been a good morning.
It's okay. This morning, the SG in his remarks, when he was basically discussing the ramifications of the closure of the Rafah and Karim Abu Salam crossings, he mentioned the risk of running out of fuel this evening. Do you have something, can you elaborate on that? Do you have more
I'll
information?
let Andrea, our colleague from OCHA, will speak to that.
And then just
please
one more.
Go ahead.
And I mean, with growing calls now from lawmakers and other entities to actually stop arming Israel, stop sending arms to Israel. Does the SG have any position on that, given, his remarks this morning and now Netanyahu saying, he's not backing down from Arafat?
I mean, we've been asked this question before for this conflict and others. Our answer has always been that those who send arms have a responsibility in terms of how they're used. Benny, then Nabil, and then Stefano.
Absent from the Secretary General's comment this morning about closure of the Kerem Shalom was the cause, which was a barrage of mortars from Rafah into Kerem Shalom. Has that, and there was another one of 20 mortars, if I remember correctly, today. Does that impact at all?
Of course, the actions
issue?
of all the parties and the escalations.
No. He said Israel has to reopen.
What?
He said Israel has
Yes.
to reopen. Does that include also stopping bombing? That
Of course it does. Nabil.
Thank you. Thank you, Stefan. Maybe I missed it, but do you have a reaction on the threats that the ICC prosecutor is receiving if he takes action against Israel?
No one should threaten anyone, and that includes the International Criminal Court.
Another question, it seems that a Jordanian convoy was maybe disrupted or stopped by settlers before reaching Erez crossing. Are you discussing this matter with Israel? Because this is happening almost every week, and it seems that settlers are attacking these convoys on regular basis.
Yes, I believe the Jordanians have addressed this as well, given that it came from Jordan. We have. Humanitarian aid should be able to flow freely wherever it is needed. And we have seen multiple cases of it being attacked, diverted, in different instances on different sides of this conflict. The point of humanitarian aid should be allowed to travel and unimpeded and safely. Stefano.
Thank you, Stefan. First, a light thing. I think I never heard the Secretary General, not this one, any, speaking in Italian and the General Assembly. So maybe you can confirm.
It is a first for the three Secretary Generals that I have served.
Very good.
Whether or not Utant or Dag Hammarskjöld or Trygve Lie spoke Italian in the General Assembly, you would have to look at the archives.
Anyway, was nice.
Or Kurt Waldheim.
Was nice to hear. It's a nice pronunciation. Was really nice. Then the tough question. A tough question is about the President of the Republic of Italy today and the General Assembly say that UNRWA should be financed. It's very important they should manage it. But the Italian government, the Meloni government, did not take this decision yet. So my question is, what the Secretary General and the President of the Republic yesterday during the meeting, did they have a conversation, particular conversation on UNRWA, and what the President of the Republic explained to Guterres about the situation?
Stefano, I understand your question. We call on all to fund UNRWA. But if you think I'm going to try to insert myself between the President of the Republic and the President of the Council of Ministers of the Government of Italy, you will not see me do that.
Okay, just one comment. But did they speak about UNRWA?
I don't know if UNRWA specifically came up in their conversation.
Thank you,
Mr.
Steph.
Schwinghammer.
I want to go back to Kristen's question because I think it's quite relevant. You say on the one hand that what we see in Rafah is forced displacement. And the UN standpoint here is that forced displacement of protected people is a war crime. So it seems to be very simple math that we are seeing war crimes in Gaza right now.
The determination of the math needs to be made. Whether or not it has happened will need to be made by a competent court. Okay, yes, Dennis.
Today, Vladimir Putin was inaugurated as president of Russia. Has the UN sent a letter?
A letter will be sent by the Secretary General, as he does whenever a head of state is inaugurated or re-inaugurated, as the case may be.
Thank you for listening today. You've been listening to Policy and Rates here in Depictions Media Radio. I've been your host, Michael Clogs, and I will leave you with some final thoughts. The average person in Palestine, in Gaza, is caught between two extremes. Israel being one of those extremes, and the other extreme, of course, being the Hamas especially after October 7th, that they took hostages and killed Israeli citizens. But remember that these extremes have been in existence in this area for over 100 years and have been fighting and causing unrest since 1917. And there are some attitudes on either side that are just simply hateful, and that hate is what is causing such harm that we are seeing today. We're witnessing the effects of hatred, and maybe as a human race we need to do more to squash that type of hatred. So find that subscribe button wherever it may be, and if you stumble across our support website, please do give us some support and help us continue to report on stories in a way that we can promote love and end hatred. This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.